Exiles, have you ever asked yourself, what if Facebreaker builds have 50,000 energy shield? Now, for those of you that were wondering that exact question, I decided I'd go ahead and answer it for you, while also helping out the people with the, man, Lance only makes minion build jokes, and get back to their roots where they used to joke about me being an Ivory Tower Andy. And that is why we have Facebreaker plus Ivory Tower, match made in heaven, brought to you by the new vestigial items from the Legion encounter. This Legion change was massive for any builds that had basically guaranteed or forced uniques in their build. And Ivory Tower, of course, as you well know, is a unique chess piece, and it's kind of a mandatory piece when you're trying to do an Ivory Tower build, and this is an insane buff to that build for two very big reasons. Reason number one, it should go without saying, the only reason you use the Shaper's Touch gloves in an Ivory Tower build is for the 1% energy shield per 10 strength. This is obviously very limiting in unique glove choice. You couldn't choose any other gloves. But in this league, you could put whatever gloves you want and put Shaper's Touch on top of it. That's how we have a Facebreakers that has all the energy shield of a Shaper's Touch while being a Facebreaker build. Number two is the Ivory Tower. There's a lot of good combinations, and I want to highlight to me what I think is, or highlight to you guys what I think is the best possible option, which is the Iron Fortress mod. 1% block attack damage per 50 strength. I really think this mod is basically the best possible mod there is of these options for a very specific reason. Ivory Tower builds are strength stacker builds if you're doing a life ES scaling setup. And what that means is this one singular mod block caps us. Our character has 65-65 block because we have a new corruption implicit versatile combatant, which means all of our overcap on attack block becomes spell block, and I haven't invested a single point into this character's block tree, yet I have capped block. So for me, vestigial items are kind of insane with what they can do for your character. I just wanted to show off some of these interactions just because I like Ivory Tower and I wanted to play a Facebreaker build with the new Luminary Merc bot. And so this is the combination I was going for, building blocks. Obviously, the baseline of an Ivory Tower build, it's a strength stacker. There's nothing new there. It's just put a bunch of strength on gear, wha-bam, you have ES. Now, the important thing about why I thought this would pair decently with a Facebreaker build is because normally when you do strength stackers, you're grabbing Iron Will. Why are you doing this? You're doing this because the percent damage you get from strength stackers isn't usually applicable to most builds. Most builds don't do a strength stack into a fizz melee build. You know, there's flat fire per strength mod. There's replica Albrons, which gives you flat chaos. There is spells, which need you to grab Iron Will for percent spell damage. Stuff like that. Usually you don't actually use the baseline stat of strength, which gives you 2% physical damage per 10 strength. But we actually did use that. And the reason we are using that is because Facebreakers is a physical build. So the concept was, okay, strength will get us block, it'll give us our ES, and it will also give us our percent damage scaling. So we can do a pretty standard issue strength scaling build and get all of those categories filled in. Our avoidance, our main EHP pool, our main percent damage scaling. But it doesn't stop there because strength stackers are OP, and there's mods on helmets that say crit chance per 10 strength. This funny little mod here is giving about 400% crit chance. It's accuracy capping me. And then there's also an infamous mod that says you get base crit based on your war cries. A fun part about slam builds that are unarmed is you have no base crit. Well, with this mod and 5 different exerts I have in my build, I end up with 15 base crit from that mod alone. So this helmet is almost getting us to crit cap just by the base crit from the exerts and the accuracy. So with strength scaling, we get not only our base EHP, our avoidance layer, our percent damage scaling, we get our crit chance, and we get our base crit from the slam exert helmet. That's what's going on here. That was kind of the build idea. And now I want to talk about why Luminary, why does it make Mercenary, or why does it make Facebreakers good? You probably saw this from Aloha's video. I believe Dire Grey did a video. It's pretty simple. This Merc bot has Rallying Cry on the skill set. Rallying Cry gives I think it's about, at maximum power, it's about 24% of the base damage weapon, or base damage from the weapon the Merc is wearing to you, the player, or any allies that are around as a buff. Now, you can scale this with things like Warcry buff effect, like this helmet has 40 Warcry buff effect. The body armor implicit has 42 Warcry buff effect. The boots have Rallying Cry buff effect. And what ends up happening is you invest into a lot of these sorts of mods. You get Warcry buff effect through Annoyance. You get Warcry buff effect through these sorts of things. And all of a sudden, this weapon, which normally would give 24%, is giving like 75% of its base damage. So all of a sudden, you have a character which is wearing a Facebreakers that gets 1,000 base physical damage, and then Facebreaker says, hold on, let's multiply that number by 11. So that's why Facebreakers goes from kind of just a meme, like niche outer tier build. With Luminary, it becomes a very real build because you can give it so much base damage. Because compared to what you have to do normally with a Facebreaker build, is you'd have to grab a bunch of flat fizz rolls on your rings, which are going like 10 to 20, 10 to 20, 4 to 14. Like you're doing rolls like that, which are barely anything in terms of physical damage. You might even be putting on an Abyssus, which says 40 to 60 damage, and the Abyssus says you take 40% increased fizz. It makes you very, very squishy. There's a lot of downsides trying to make Facebreakers do damage, and the Mercenary, the Swift Blade Mercenary specifically, lets you kind of bypass all of those downsides and just gives you massive fizz damage without the downsides of having to gear flat fizz everywhere. Now, one caveat to this is occasionally, when you're running around, running and gunning, doing a map, there's a scenario where I'm over here, the Mercenary's over there, he procs his rallying cry, and it doesn't apply to me. And all of a sudden, there's about, like, I don't know, 4 or 5 second cooldown where he is just doing whatever, and I have no base fizz. This is one of those situations where you could gear some flat fizz, so that way you at least have some baseline damage. I didn't bother to do this, so occasionally, when this guy didn't war cry, I was effectively hitting like a pool noodle and doing no damage, because that guy is literally all of my flat physical from this weapon with the rallying cry buff, applying it to my character. That's kind of the situation that's going on here between me and the Mercenary, and the situation and the dynamic there. Now, I want to take note of something that I learned while doing this character that I think is very good to know about Mercenaries, which is this node, Loyal Bodyguard, is very nice defensively for the player. However, it is the main reason your Mercenary is dying. It says if your Mercenary's life is higher than your own, 20% of damage from hits is taken from your Mercenary's life before you. When I had the initial clips of this video, if you go back and watch the footage, I showcased one where I tank the Brain Blast and my Mercenary instantly dies. And I showcased a different clip where the Mercenary is in the Brain Blast and I'm slightly out of it. The Brain Blast goes off and the Mercenary takes basically no damage. As far as I can tell, what's happening here is normally the Mercenary has a very high built-in damage reduction, which is why they're so freaking tanky, even though you don't have to really gear them very hard. The thing is, I went to the extent of like trying to make this guy tanky. I got him gear, which made him suppress capped. I gave him PDR. I gave him Giga Regen. I was like, I'm going to make this guy tanky. I gave him Recoup. But there was one very key flaw to this plan. This node right here, what happens is 20% of damage that would hit you goes to your Mercenary, and that damage goes around the damage reduction the Merc normally comes with. So, for example, if I take 20,000 damage, 4,000 damage is going to go straight to the Mercenary, and he can't reduce it. So, a Brain Bomb, an attack like that deals so much damage to my character, it's actually enough for this 20% roll, one-shots the Mercenary through, and because it goes straight through his DR. So, if you were playing a Merc bot and you're like, this Mercenary is really tanky, and then you try to play a build that is not a Merc bot, all of a sudden their tank may feel way worse. And it's unfortunately because of this node, because the damage that gets redirected to your Mercenary is dealt in full force, and your Mercenary does not mitigate it. And all of a sudden, if you have a really tanky character, what that means is your Mercenary is going to start dying when you're not dying. So just a weird interaction. It was pointed out to me by a chatter, and I believe that they're 100% correct, that this is damage that doesn't get basically reduced like it normally would. For the Mercenary, it's unreducible damage that is just redirected to them, as far as I can tell. Just a little bit weird, because normally when you talk about damage taken as blah, 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 when you're redirecting sources, I feel like that stuff can work where the damage reduction applies afterwards. Like, for example, let's say you have cold taken as fire, you get hit with a shaper ball. Normally the pen would hurt, but since you take it as fire, the pen doesn't hurt, and the damage reductions apply after the damage is taken from that before that. But that's maybe more like conversion, whereas this is taken from this source before this source, which is a different situation. You get the idea. Anyways, point is, Mercenaries, if they're dying a lot, this is actually why it is. And one of the funny things is, initially when I made this character, I was like, okay, maybe I can make a really high ES character which does a ton of damage, which is what I successfully did. And I was thinking maybe this character could be tanky enough to do Feared or something, do some Valdo maps. I quickly came to the realization that will never work for this type of build, because the Mercenary will always die even if your character is tanky, because the damage gets diverted to them at full force. They don't reduce it, and they will just get absolutely obliterated by that sort of content because they don't have their mitigation that they normally do. All right, that's enough of me talking about that. As for the rest of the character, I made some very troll decisions. You may notice my character is attacking at the pace of a snail. You may notice I have no Quicksilver. You may notice I don't even have a source of rage generation. Why is this? This is because I wanted to do a little bit of energy shield ladder climbing. So we made a few decisions that I will point out and highlight. For example, this character's concept, very, very strong. There are things that would make it a much more practical, more powerful character, and I'm going to kind of highlight some of the obvious ones. But I wanted to push the ladder. I got a little bit sidetracked, and we ended up at position 2 for a Facebreaker build. It got me a little addicted to pushing the ES ladder, and I'm going to reroll another Ivory Tower build after this, because I think we can hit actually an insane number for ES if you have a build that's actually made for it. Facebreakers isn't really made for it for a few reasons, but I'm not going to get into those. As for making the character less troll, there's a few things you can do. Number 1 is Warcry CDR is very important for this build. Your damage scales a hell of a lot with the Warcry CDR and with having extra exerts. Initially, when I was playing the build, I was playing with Measured Fury, and then I swapped to this node to push ES, Written in Blood, but ultimately, this Anoint is much stronger because it gives you an extra exert on your double damage. It makes you more consistently have all, like, 5-year Warcries applying, which gives all your base crit. So in order to support that, I'd recommend going this node instead on your Anoint. I'd recommend getting the CDR here, as well as getting these max rage nodes here with the rage per Warcry and minimum power. This will ensure your charge up time. This will ensure you have max rage, 40 max rage at all time, and it'll ensure you have better Warcry up time so you can spam your attacks more consistently, which will feel a lot better. Another thing I would probably do is I would probably consider shifting away from voices to potentially some large clusters which have attack speed and physical damage, strength, all attributes, stuff like that. I obviously did multiple small clusters. These are your best in slot things to do if you want to push your ES number, but I don't think that's really should be your top priority. 50,000 ES is way overkill for the majority of content. I tried to showcase what it looks like in a Uber Elder, which your ES just doesn't even move. At 30k ES, newsflash, you're still going to be completely AFK in that fight. So I think it's worth considering reinvesting some of these points into some other places, like, let's say, max rage, like, let's say, CDR, minimum power, rage on Warcry, large clusters that give you attack speed. Because the biggest issues with this character is it's kind of slow, right? We don't have fast attack speed. Get rid of the extra ring. Go a Mage Blood. I'd imagine you're going to lose like 20,000 energy shield doing these things. Your damage is not going to go down. It's going to go way up. And your speed is going to go way up. The building blocks of Facebreaker plus Ivory are pretty insane. Facebreaker, massive fizz. We're like dealing like 10,000 base fizz when you consider the Azadi Warcry, when you consider the multiplier here. And it's actually a little bit more than that because you can get Bound, which gives another 20% bonus on your Facebreakers. Very good scaling. I'm obviously trolling a bit here by pushing the ES ladder. I was just doing it for fun. But your character can be way stronger, way faster in terms of like destroying content if you want to go that route. And I just want to basically give some of those suggestions. So anyways, all in all, I wanted to play a Facebreaker character and just see how much ES we could get on it. This is the route I went with, but I would suggest looking into some of those changes that I recommended, like Warcry CDR, anointing the extra exert, max rage, going to Mage Blood, dropping the third ring, stuff like that. And I think you'll be very much better off for it. So yeah, those are some of my recommendations. Also, for example, I went Sunder. A better skill, a better all-rounder skill is something like a Earth Shatter, obviously, by all directional attacks. Works better with if you have more of that Warcry CDR, stuff like that. But all in all, had a lot of fun playing a Ivory Tower build. It's been a hot minute since I've played one, and I just wanted to showcase that the new Vestigial mods are kind of insane for this build type because there's a lot of good unique gloves that pair really well with the Shaper's Touch mod. There's a lot of unique mods that pair really well with Ivory Tower, especially this block mod. It's insane to get block cap just right out the gate without doing much like that. And so, yeah, that's what's going on there. I'm not going to get too much into the nitty-gritty of other stuff I did here. You can look at the POB if you're really curious. And yeah, hopefully you guys enjoy this video looking at a Facebreaker build. As always, thanks for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video.